Amen. Grab hold of your Bibles and say this with me. Say, this is my Bible. I have what it says I have. I can do what it says I can do. I declare this morning, my mind is alert. My heart is receptive. I'll be taught the Word of God. And I'll never be the same again. Well, we started a series a few weeks ago called March Madness. We're talking about the things that are mad in our lives. We talked about chaos one week, about there's just this madness and chaos. But we also came to this realization that peace is not the absence of chaos. Peace is the presence of Jesus, right? And so then last week we talked about anger. And the fact that, anger is this emotion and it doesn't become sin until it begins, we let it dictate the behavior that we have, the decisions that we make. And that it says, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. And so we should deal with it with an urgency. Get rid of it quickly. It should not be allowed to stay in our life. Well, today I want to talk to you about, for every one of us in here, there are things that we desire in our heart. Maybe it's a job, maybe it's a calling, maybe it's a relationship. But there's something in us that God has put in us. And maybe it's been there for a while and it hasn't come to pass yet. And there can be this madness because it can be so frustrating that it hasn't happened yet. And so we're going to look at some reasons, some things that have to take place, and maybe why that is. So if you would, go with me first of all to Luke chapter 16. Now, if you're still learning your way around the Bible, there's an Old Testament and a New Testament. The Old Testament starts with Genesis. The New Testament starts with Matthew. And so Luke is in the New Testament. There's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Luke was a doctor that was a Jesus follower, so he writes this eyewitness account of Jesus. He talks with other people. He gets this information. And so in this, he reveals one of Jesus' teachings. And so in Luke 16, verse 10, he said this. He said, if you're faithful in little things, everybody say little things. If you're faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones. If you and I, if we're faithful in little stuff, then we'll be faithful in big things, big stuff. Then he went on to say, but if you're dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. And if you're untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? And if you're not faithful with other people's things, say other people's things. Or it's not my stuff, somebody else's stuff. If I'm not faithful with their things, then why should you be trusted with things of your own? So one of the reasons why whenever we have this passion, this dream, this desire of our heart, and we're just like, I know this is what God wants for me. I know that this is the way He wants it, or He wants this kind of relationship, or He has this call in my life. And yet the things that I see, the things I desire haven't come to pass yet. And sometimes it's like, is it ever going to happen? It just feels like it's taken so long that one of the things that has to take place is that there's this proving time for me and you. And here's the areas we have to prove ourselves in. One is in small things. Things that people don't see. Things that are only evident to God. That He sees between He and I. Things that other people would say, that's really not a big deal. Those things are our opportunity to prove our faithfulness in. That in small things, what people don't see, not a big deal, then we get to be faithful in bigger things. And then not only that, he said trustworthy with the word that's used here, the phrase that's used here is worldly wealth. That means like common riches. Things that are common. We may put a lot of value on it, but over the test of time, they're just common. As empires rise and fall, the wealth of those things, that they come and go on a different standard. But then there are these eternal riches that are timeless, that don't age, that they hold their value. So if we're faithful with the common things, the common riches, common things we're entrusted with, then we can be trusted with like eternal riches. And then he goes on to say that if we're not faithful with other people's things, so the third area that we get to be faithful with is someone else's stuff. And we're faithful with someone else's stuff. It seems like before we get to do our own, we have to be a part of someone else's. I would dare say that most of us in here, that you're a part of someone else's dream. You're part of something that God birthed into their life, and yet you're a part of it. And maybe you're having to do that until you get to do what it is that God has called you to do. But the truth of the matter is you don't get to do that until you're faithful with the thing that they've called you to do. with God until the faithful thing that God's called them to. So there's this proving that takes place in our lives, right? I mean, one of the reasons why we haven't recognized it yet is because there's still this thing that God is doing in us. And so first of all, it starts with the small things. I've shared this story before that, I did student ministry in New Mexico. I'm from here, but we did student ministry in New Mexico for 17 years. And I remember the first couple of years, we only had 20 or 30 students showing up. And man, I was so frustrated. And I was like, I just really want us to reach more students. So we thought, we're going to do this event. And our goal was to have 60 students. Now that seems kind of small. But back then, man, that felt huge to me. So we did this event. We're going to have pizza. We got this really, and back then this was cool. It wouldn't be cool today. We got this really cool movie we're going to show them and all that kind of stuff. And so sure enough, we pumped it up with our students. And we had 64 students that night. I was so excited. We had pizza ready and we gave them pizza. And then we got up to show them the movie. We knew that, with students, you kind of got their time, their attention is kind of this scale that you have to be aware of. And so we got up there and we turned on the TV and the video. And nothing happened. Because we hadn't, meaning me, anytime I say we right here, I'm probably talking about myself. We had not turned it on to get it working. And so nothing comes on. And I'm like, oh, hey, no problem, no panic. So I go up there and I'm trying to, be cool, kind of like a duck, look smooth above water and paddle like crazy or anything. So I'm doing all this. And then a guy comes up and he's going to help me. He's going to help me. And so every time I pushed a button, he pushed another one. And I wanted to hit him and say, stop pushing buttons. Neither one of us know what we're doing. And finally, I realized as my frustration level rose that I was going to let him try to fix it. And I thought, I probably just need to step aside. So I kind of stepped aside. I went into another room for a minute. And I know what you're thinking, man, you were praying, weren't you? And I'm like, well, I should have been. I wasn't praying. Matter of fact, I was mad. I kind of kicked the wall, and I'm like, somebody's like, man, what was that? Well, I think that was Pastor. So I was, So I was just really frustrated. And while I'm going through this, then I have this God thought. You know how God sometimes He just gives us a thought and He speaks to us with a God thought? I had this God thought and He's like, until you're prepared to reach 60 students on a regular basis, you're not going to have this regularly. This, what you're experiencing right now is why you're not having it. And there's part of me like, man, Lord, could we save this conversation for later? I'm under a little stress right now. If you could just make the video come on, that would really help. But we got it. But he was right. I mean, I wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared. In other words, I wasn't taking care of that. I had to treat those 20 or 30 the same way that I would if 60 were there. And when I did that, then lo and behold, the 60 students that I have an opportunity to minister would begin to show up because I'd proven myself faithful with them. And then when those got there, then I had to treat it like 100 was there. And as I did that, then 100 would show up. And so, as we're faithful in little things, in small things, then we get an opportunity to be faithful in other things. Same church. I've been there for a number of years. I had a stirring in my heart to come back to my home and give the rest of my life here. And so I was dealing with that struggle, and I was like, man, Lord, I'm ready to go. And about that time, some other guys on staff, some other pastors on staff got opportunities, and the timing for them, they had to take it at that time. They couldn't wait. And so I watched as two guys, and there was not any issues, man. The relationships were good and that kind of thing. But it was a larger church at that point, had grown. And so you don't always know what's going on behind the scenes. But I did because I was back there. And so, but everything was good. But I thought, man, if I leave now, that'll be 3 guys that are pastors leaving within a matter of a few months. That's not going to be good for the church. And I just had this thing on the inside of the Lord just saying, don't go. Wait. And man, my flesh was like, yeah, but I really want to go. I'm getting older. Is my window going to shut? And He's like, I want you to be faithful here with somebody else's stuff. And it was this time that was really hard to resist. But this was one of those times that I actually yielded to the Lord and did what He wanted to. And I believe that when we started this place, that one of the reasons why they were so good to us is because of those moments and those opportunities when we did our best to be faithful with what was somebody else's dream. That God said, okay, now here's yours. Here's the question we have to ask ourselves. What am I doing with what I have? Am I so focused on what I want to have and where I want to be that everything around me in this moment is being neglected? The people that God has put in my life, they're neglected because I really want to be over here. I really want to be doing that thing, this thing. But I'm really neglecting what He's entrusted me with right now because where I really want to be is there. What about the job I've been given? What What about, the areas, if ministry is one of those things, the areas of ministry that I'm getting a chance to speak into people's lives? Am I faithful where I'm at? I think it's interesting. If there's a guy in the Old Testament by the name of Joseph, and when he was a young man, God gave him 2 dreams. And the outcome of those dreams was that his brothers would serve him and his parents would serve him. God revealed to him, hey, you're gonna be in this place, in this position, and as a result of that, your family is going to be underneath you. And do you know what God did to prepare him? He put him in somebody else's dream. Matter of fact, he put him in Potiphar's life, and then he was even sent to prison and had to serve the prisoner, and then he was promoted whenever Pharaoh had a dream, and Joseph was able to give purpose to Pharaoh's dream. Then God said, now you get to live yours. And so there's this proving that takes place in our lives. Number one is this. Why is there madness? Why do we have to wait? Because we have to spend time proving ourselves, being faithful where we are with what God has called us to do. Look at number 2, if you would. Go with me to Matthew 25. You're in Luke there. And before Luke is Mark, and then before Mark is Matthew. Matthew 25, verse 14. Now, in this are a number of parables in this chapter that Jesus was telling, saying, this is what the kingdom of heaven is like. This is what the kingdom of God is like. It's like this. It's like that. And so in Matthew 25, verse 14, it says, again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. Everybody say their abilities. He then left on his trip. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earn 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. And after a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used their money. That's not what it says, right? Not how they'd use their money, how they'd use his money. So now again, the object he's using here is money, but you can put in there anything that God has entrusted you with. Maybe for you it is finances. Maybe for you it is a dream. Maybe it's your marriage. Maybe it's your children. Whatever it is he's entrusted you with, that he lets us use those things, and then there comes a time where we have to tell him what we did with it. And so the first guy he entrusted with 5, and it says the reason why he gave him 5, it says it gave it to him according to his ability. This is what he was able to handle. It wasn't like he liked him better than the other guy. He just looked at him. He wanted to put him in position to succeed. He didn't want to give him more than he could handle, so he gave him 5. And the other person he gave 2, and the other one he gave 1. And again, it wasn't like he liked one better. He's like, I want you to succeed so much. I know you can handle this here. And so he gave it to him. And over time, the one guy with 5, he began to use what he had. And in time, he went back. When he had to give an account, he said to his master, he said, you gave me 5. Here's 10. He had developed his ability by using what his master had trusted him with. The other guy said, you gave me 2. Here's 4. He doubled his ability by using what his master trusted him with. The last guy came and he goes, I know you can get kind of picky about these things, and sometimes, you're kind of a hard guy to deal with, so I didn't do anything with it. And he lost. The guy took it away from him and gave it to the guy with 10. And it's such a picture of what God does with us, that he entrusts us with this dream, and he equips us with the things that we'll need to bring about what he's placed in our heart. Whatever vision he's given us, whatever passion he's given us, he places that in our heart, and he gives us the resources we need, but he requires us to use them over time, to use them in small things so we get to use them in big things, to use them in other people's stuff so we get to use them in our own, to use them with things that are kind of common so we get to use them in things that are eternal and significant. Now, we can use our gifts for other purposes, to bear fruit in something else, but he's always given it to us so it can bear fruit in his kingdom. So one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, what am I doing with the small things in my life? Am I indifferent to them, or am I looking at those as moments and opportunities? What am I doing with somebody else's stuff? Am I treating it like I would my own? Because that's when I get entrusted with my own. What am I doing with these gifts? Am I using them as an opportunity arises so that I can develop that gift? Now, I'm biased when I say this, but I don't think that doesn't mean it's not accurate. I think we have great praise and worship here. I like our musicians and that kind of thing. Don't you guys think we have great praise and worship? Yeah. And so, I think Jake does a great job. Laura and Emily, all those, they just do a great job of just singing it. And there are times where people are like, man, I have a gift to do worship. And I'm like, well, man, then do it. Yeah, but they won't let me on the platform. That's not where Jake started. You know where he started? Kids Life. He went down to Kids Life. And I'm sure that he has these dreams of his own, this passion of his own, these things of his own that he wants, that there were probably mornings that some kid would show up and nose needing to be blowed. Just being a kid, being 7 years old, acting 7 like 7-year-olds are supposed to act. That would have been easy for him to think, my dreams are so much bigger than this. I need to be on YouTube, or I need to be on Facebook. And again, there's not anything wrong with those things, but I'm just too big for this down here. This is just too big. And I've discovered this, man, that those people that are too big to do small things are too small to do big things. And so we take those opportunities that God gives us, those doors that are open, and we serve our way to the place that we want to be. That we begin to develop the gifts that He's given us. I just have to tell this story. Typically, when I tell family stories, and I always want to make sure that I look bad in the story, okay? This is going to be an exception right here. I'm going to make somebody else look bad. No, not David. Are you ready, Ashley? So I love my daughter, and she's just a lot of fun. And when she was little, man, she had this confidence level that was just, and I like that. I would rather be confident high. People say, are you afraid she'll get arrogant or conceited? The world will take care of that. They'll knock it out of you. I'm telling you, right? So, I'm okay with it. You go out there and think that that's yours. You can tackle it with God. You can do anything you want to do. Well, so one day, I'm so sorry. One day, the children's pastor came up to me and he goes, hey, man, we're excited about Ashley playing the keyboard in Kids Life or in Children's Church. I said, really? You're excited about that, huh? And he goes, yeah. I said, have you ever heard her play? And he goes, well, no, but, she gave me one to play. I said, okay. So, I was busy at the time, and I thought, well, maybe Tina, that's my wife, her mom, I said, maybe she's gotten her music lessons or something like that, and she's been playing things behind the scenes or things, and that wasn't the case. And her confidence level was so that she'd seen other people play and just saw them move their fingers on the keyboard and kind of thing, and thought, I can do that. So I thought, this isn't going to be good for her or him or whatever. So I went to the children's pastor and said, I don't want to discourage anybody, but you might want to let her audition for you before. So he came back to me later and says, yeah, I don't think she's going to play for us. And so now she liked music, and she's smart enough that if she really would have invested in it, she could have played the keyboard. But it was one of those things that would be fun for her, but she had other gifts like speaking and stuff like that. Was that a good recovery? And so I'm in so much trouble. Anyway, but it's one of those things, so many times it's just such a picture of who we are. Even, it's one thing when we see it from a child, we get that, right? But the problem is some of us never grow out of it. We want God to use us at a place beyond our development, beyond our sacrifice, beyond our commitment. And right here, these guys, it took them time to grow to that place. It took them time to develop that gift. So many of us have heard the situation, the historical account of David and Goliath, where David as a teenager stood before this battle-tested Philistine, this battle-tested guy that was not a believer in their God. And he had this Philistine, this guy named Goliath, had a history of being in battles, of being heroic. He was their hero. He wasn't just some new guy that showed up. And David comes forward and he's like, I can beat him. And everybody was trying to disqualify him. And finally he said this. He said, look, he said, when I watched my father's sheep, and meaning when nobody else was around, a lion showed up and I took care of the lion. And then when I was watching my father's sheep and a bear showed up when nobody else was around, and I took care of the bear. And the reason why I'm able to stand before Goliath in the face of all of these people in public is because in private, when nobody else was watching, in small situations and small circumstances, I seized the moment as if it was in front of this crowd. And that's why I'm ready for this moment today. We miss so many opportunities because when we start, we don't believe the stage is big enough. We don't think the platform is big enough. We think we're too big. And the truth of the matter is that for God to do in us what He wants to do in us and through us, that we have to be willing to develop our gift. We have to continue to develop the gift that God has given us. As opportunities arise, I can remember having a desire to minister. And this is how it went for me. I'd pray and say, man, Lord, I see my buddies getting opportunities, and I don't feel like I'm getting opportunities. Just lay it on somebody's heart, let me teach a Bible study. And so he would do that, and then I get an opportunity. I'm like, oh, I can't believe they asked me. I felt so uncomfortable and so awkward, and yet I wanted to seize those moments, and we have to seize those opportunities in those small places, in those hidden places. Because the people that you're reaching now, the things that you're doing now, they may be invisible to a public world, but they're not invisible to a private God. He sees them and they matter. And so one of the reasons why it hasn't happened yet, one of the reasons why I get so frustrated, because the thing that God has placed in my heart, I've not recognized it yet. It could be because He's still proving me and developing me. But then also it could be because my gift is still being developed so that when I get to that place, that I'm ready. Not just also from just a physical standpoint, from a gifting standpoint, but from a character standpoint too, right? Because there are challenges that come with that. There are things that we have to be prepared for with that. You know, when we were doing student ministry, we got to a place that we were doing 20 and then 30. And then eventually we got to a place where we're reaching 300 or 400 kids a week. And they built us this new facility. And we were so excited about it. And I thought everybody else would be excited about it too. But man, I faced so much persecution and criticism in this small town because of what we were doing in this facility. It was incredibly hard on me. You know, I realize that even today I struggle with that sometimes caring what people think, I've got to be careful because that becomes a big deal. Tina she'll give me a hard time. She goes, you just want people to like you. And my response will be, why is that a bad thing? Why is that a bad thing? Should I want them not to like me? But I knew what she meant, that sometimes that can take precedent over just really leaning in and just pressing through. And as hard as that season in my life was, that God used it to prepare me for the next thing. So sometimes we have to grow because that moment may be big enough for our talent, but it's too big for our character. And so God's developing that in us too, because ultimately our character becomes our fate. And so we have to realize that God's doing a work in us as we use those gifts, as we develop them, as we press through when opportunities arise, small or big, opportunities to share, opportunities to do, to serve our way to the place that God has called us. And so number two is this, is that because we have to continue developing the gift that God has given us. Let's look at number three and we'll close with this. Go with me, if you would, to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews 11. You were in Matthew. Hebrews is in the New Testament. So you got Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. You'll keep going. Acts, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st, 2nd Thessalonians, 1st, 2nd Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 11. Now Hebrews 11 is talking about these different people and how God had spoken to them and the things that they had to do and how this challenge was to believe God and to just, to trust Him that where He was taking them, what He wanted to do in their life, He was going to get them to. So in Hebrews 11, verse 24, it says, it was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called. It was by faith when Moses grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He refused to be called. He also turned away from the fleeting pleasures of sin. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt. For he was looking ahead to his great reward. It was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He kept right on going because he kept his eyes on the one who is invisible. One of the other reasons why sometimes we don't experience yet what God has placed in our heart. And again, I'm not just talking about ministry. Maybe you're single and you desire to be married. Are you faithful in the lives of people that you're with right now? Maybe you're dating somebody. That person you're dating, maybe they're not going to be your spouse eventually. But are you faithful in who's going to ultimately be somebody else's spouse? Are you faithful in those things? Are you pure in that? And to have that calling and understanding, whether it's our ministry, whether it's relationships, whether it's the things that He's given us. Well, Moses, as a young man, felt this call on his life for God to use him, for him to deliver the children of Israel out of slavery. They'd been in slavery for over 400 years. And he felt like, man, in my position, God's called me. Well, he tried to do it on his own, and that made a mess. Well, eventually, he had to make this decision that I'm not going to be called Pharaoh's daughter anymore. In other words, people's expectations that they put on him would no longer define who he is or what he did. And for some of us, we have to be willing to let go of what other people's expectations of us are. That as long as we hang on to those things, they'll mislead us, we'll feel a pressure that will cause us to go in a direction that God hasn't called us to do. So he had to turn loose of that. And then also, it says this, that he had to turn away from the fleeting pleasure of sin. He had to let go of that. And he would rather suffer with God's people than to embrace these fleeting pleasures of sin. The second thing is that he had to let go of things that would distract him, things that would destroy him. Sin destroys us. It destroys what God has put in our way. It's just so destructive in our lives. And so he had to turn loose of that, turn away from sin. Because it was a distraction to him. It was destructive to the things that he wanted. And then also it said that he had to be willing to leave the land. He had to be willing to leave the familiar and the comfortable, to go into the unfamiliar and the uncomfortable, to let God lead him there. If we're truly journeying with God, then the start of every season begins with, I so need you. When's the last time you've been in that place? Where it's beyond your gift. Because we get so comfortable with our giftings, with the things that God has called us to do, that sometimes it's easy to forget that when I began this, I needed Him. And if I'm really growing, my recognition of that hasn't diminished. It's only grown exponentially because I know how much more I need Him now. But sometimes our unwillingness to be stretched, to step into the unfamiliar, to be uncomfortable, really limits the place that God can take us. Because He always wants us to be in a place where we have to trust Him. It says without faith, you can't please Him. So every step we take has to be one of those like, God, I'm dependent upon you here. I need you here. It's a place of dependence. And then also that it said that He looked to Him that was invisible. You know, the real truth of the matter is that we have to let go of the things behind us, the pain, the shame, the disappointment, our mistakes. Let go of those things. We have to keep our eyes on Jesus, because here's the thing about it is that all of this comes down to one thing. Listen to this. Listen to this. All this comes down to one thing. It was never mine to begin with. It's His. It was never my gift. He entrusted me with it. And over time, I began to treat it like it's mine. And I began to do with it what I wanted to do. And I lost sight of the fact that this isn't mine, it's His. And when I come back someday, it won't be just have you developed, but have you done with it what I want you to do? What about, it's not your marriage. It's His. And over time, to be able to recognize that, it affects the way that I respond when I'm disappointed in what I do. It's His. What about, those are kids that He's entrusted me with and how I parent them. What about the dream that God has placed in us that we get so impatient and so frustrated, sometimes even with Him, because it feels like He's not doing it fast enough. But in that, I lose sight of the fact that it's His. Not only is it His, I'm His. And sometimes because of our mistakes, we feel like God's finished with us. And if you're not dead, God's not done. And so we have to embrace the fact that I'm His, and everything that I have are just things that He's lent me for this time, for this season of my life, for this place that I have. And I want to be faithful in those little things that nobody else sees. I want to be faithful in the things that some people would say really don't matter so that I can have the things that really do in this relationship. I want to be faithful in the things that somebody else has a claim to so that when I'm giving my stuff, that God will surround me with people that are faithful with it too. And to use the gift that He's given me and not wait till the big moment, the big opportunity. I'm not waiting for that. I'm preparing for it. I'm not waiting for somebody to open the door. I'm serving my way there, preparing my way so that when it's open, that you're ready. You're ready for that moment, that you recognize it as that took place there because God knew I was going to be here in this moment. In the meantime, there's this impatience that can happen, this unsettling, and sometimes God has to remind us, trust my timing. Trust my timing. Be faithful right there. Keep being available. Keep using the opportunity that I've given you. I'll open up the doors. There's a path that God uses that we know nothing of, but He does. And so sometimes we have to make that commitment to say, in this moment, I have to be reminded, this is yours. It's your thing, it's your stuff, your calling, your relationship, your marriage, your family, your ministry, your church. What do you want me to do? That begins with a letting go of. I'm letting go of me thinking I own it. I'm letting go of any pride, any disappointment, any hurt, any fear, any of those things that cause me to hang on and keep me in control. I release those things. I want to do this. I think a great place to have that moment is in communion. And I'm going to ask our ushers to begin to serve you right now in communion. And they're going to serve you trays. And in the trays, there'll be 2 cups stacked on top of each other. Grab both of those cups and hang on to it for just a minute. We'll take it all together. You're like, well, this isn't typically my church. If you're a Christian, you're welcome, part of the family, you're family of God, you're welcome to take communion with us. We welcome you to do that. But as you pull those cups out, hang on to them. Spend a moment with God. And as He deals with you about things in your life, things to turn loose of. Things to maybe you've missed opportunities to use your gift because the platform wasn't big enough. The opportunity wasn't big enough. Maybe your frustration is there and He's just saying, just keep being faithful where you are. Keep letting Him do that. And as you do that, let's just take a moment and just let God just do something in us for this moment.